of event producers, breaking even may be a very high priority for you. Now, as you would expect, the normal rule of supply and demand applied to your ticket sales. Now, more information at registration and higher ticket prices will typically lead to fewer people making a commitment and going through with a purchase. Another consideration that is often relevant for nonprofit events is that when you sell tickets, there is a requisite expectation created related to your event of a certain level of quality in the deliverables, which often includes a high-touch customer service necessity. And therefore, such organizations may choose the route of a suggested donation for a ticket instead. Now, there isn't a right or wrong approach in answering these questions. However, you should consider them alongside your main event metrics as you build your registration. The next section we're going to look at is gathering the right information for you. With any type of ticketing, you will need to determine the fields of information you wish to collect. These may include information necessary for registration and the smooth running of your event, information necessary to create a user profile in the event, and any other marketing information that is helpful for you. I'm just going to run through a list of examples of fields that you may consider, and we'll bring it up on the graphic. Name, your first and last name, email address, a full physical address, a partial physical address, country, state, postal code, telephone number, maybe social media links, a short bio, a profile picture of the attendee, a type of ticket required. You may want to suggest different types of audience journeys throughout the event. You may want to have a field for promotional codes, credit card information, and custom marketing questions and opt-ins. As we look at these fields, one of the questions that comes up, should I be concerned about privacy issues in collecting this data? As more and more companies have profited from using the personally identifiable information, PII, of their constituents, privacy concerns have become an increasing concern for any online endeavor. Now, in many countries around the world, legal frameworks have been created to protect citizens from the unscrupulous practices of certain online companies. Now, even if privacy concerns are something that you have never considered before, it's important, if you have an online presence and you collect any kind of personally identifiable information, that you give it a little bit of thought. If you have a web or an app presence, now would be a good time to develop your own privacy policy, terms of service, and perhaps a cookie policy to communicate that you are not one of those unscrupulous organizations who are going to sell data to the highest bidder. As you build the registration of your event, it's important to display these policies to your audience to communicate how you are using the audience's information. We typically find that displaying these opt-ins at the point of registration is the right place to communicate these policies. Related to these privacy issues is obviously GDPR, CCPA, and other legal requirements around the world. Now, if you have a significant audience in Europe, UK, or in California, it's important that your online event is compliant with the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, EU and UK, and the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA, respectively. You are responsible as the data controller of your constituents' information. And in a subsidiary manner, Sodius Media is responsible as a data processor for your constituents. Other jurisdictions around the world have similar provisions to GDPR and CCPA, and Sodius tries to keep up to date with many of these. But we've placed an emphasis on compliance with both GDPR and CCPA, as these, up to this point, have been the gold standard in relationship to privacy compliance. Sodius will provide you with all the relative documentation regarding how we use the information to aid in the smooth running of an online event, and will require you to give permission so that we can process your data. The next question in building your registration is, should I limit the number of devices per registration? Privacy issues are nothing to be afraid of. Well, you shouldn't be using the personal identifiable information for purposes for which you're not authorized. Obtaining the consent of attendees to opt into your calls to action is often exactly what both you and the attendee want. Business models moving forward will increasingly rely upon the organization's ability to customize their services and communications to their clients. I find it both reassuring and convenient to walk into a local coffee shop where they know your name and they've already prepared your coffee. One barrier to collecting this information, however, is when individuals share their username and passwords. And this has been a problem that Netflix and many of the other online video platforms have to deal with. When Barry from accounting tweets out his access codes and suddenly 1,500 people are using it, you have a lot of useless information about Barry. Added to the fact that you may have missed out on selling many tickets and a lot of money. For these reasons, we recommend that you limit the amount of devices per registration. When an individual buys a ticket or registers to a Saudius-powered event, a unique token is created per registration, and that is used to create the individual event journeys throughout the event. It's also possible to restrict the amount of devices that can access the event on that token. As you build the registration, it's important to consider your goals and whether you wish to restrict each token to a specific number of devices, whether it's 1 device, 10 devices, 20 devices. Audience journeys. You may choose to develop an event where every attendee is served the same content the same way. Alternately, you may wish to create an event where the audience either chooses or is placed in a custom journey related to their audience segment. In much the same way as you have choices in an in-person event, you need those same choices online. Now, this may change what content that audience segment sees, which user interface they interact with, and which other attendees they interact with as well. You may build an event where attendees get to choose what components of the event they wish to participate in and when they want to participate in it after they've entered the event, or these choices may be made by the audience during that registration process. I'm going to run through a few examples of choices that the audience can make either before registration or after registration. The first one is audience segment. Do you have a leaders track and a youth segment and a VIP segment that needs to be served different experiences, different content than the general audience? This might be determined by a ticket type in the registration process. Secondly, breakouts. Do you have multiple breakout sessions in your event, some of which should be attended by different affinity groups? Again, it is possible for individuals to opt in to this right journey for them in the registration process and therefore make an indication of which breakout they will attend at that point. Chat watch parties. In larger events, it's not advisable to have the entire audience in one chat window. Obviously, depending on how interactive the audience is. As a rule of thumb, I always say if you have an audience over 1,000, you may consider breaking your audience into watch parties by maybe geographic region or affinity group. Selecting skilled and appropriate moderators in your watch parties can add a significant value to your event. Moderators might be subject matter experts, maybe regional representatives, or maybe in a church it might be a group pastor or a cell group leader. It's also sometimes advisable to include the actual presenter in the watch party if the video being played is actually played simulated live. And so you add that live component to the event, and so people can ask questions on the fly. One-on-one meetings is another component. Part of any event are exclusive experiences. Meeting one-on-one with subject matter experts, consultants, counselors, or for personal prayer is one such exclusive experience. While this might be decided later on in the event, it's also possible to schedule this experience through the registration process and make this part of the individualized journey for the attendee. Building your online registration. For online events, registering for the event with your organization may be the first point of contact that an attendee has with you. Therefore, there are a number of elements to think through in addition to the fields of information that you're collecting. And these ultimately relate to assets that our project managers and event managers typically ask you to provide us with. Firstly, the design of the ticketing. You need to be thinking about including your event branding in the ticket. Secondly, confirmation message once registered. This is the page that appears immediately after registration to indicate success in registration. We have some stock confirmation pages, but advise you to customize this message as it's from you to the attendee. The registration confirmation email content, this is very similar to the confirmation message we just talked about. Now, we have some examples of what good confirmation emails look like, but again, this is a message from you, so it's important to ensure you get the message and the tone correct from your organization. Lastly, the pre-event landing page. Once an individual has registered, they won't experience the full event until the day that it begins. However, it is still possible to move the objectives of the event forward with an effective pre-event landing site. This is the location where registrants will be directed to upon completing registration. It includes your basic branding elements with a written welcome message and usually a countdown to when the event will open. We also advise that in addition to any text, you include a welcome video, which can help orient your audience regarding what to expect at the event, as well as creating excitement and maybe pointing people to a specific call to action that you may have in that pre-event build-up period. This might be a temporary landing page until the event watch page is created. Now let's talk about collecting money for a moment. A number of ticketing services out there handle the payment processing of an event for a significant fee, which is often taken off the top of the monies collected before the remainder then reaches you. Now we at Saudis operate on a different model, and that's a bring your own Stripe account approach. This means that you will pay the percentage transaction fee, maybe that 2 to 3%, and then receive the income directly from your audience to your bank account. The next question is, when should I open registration? Now, some organizations have established behaviors concerning when they open registration for their events, and it would create confusion to their audience if they veered from this course. However, when no such general behavior has been established, a common question that is often asked is when registration should be opened. Now, while many aspects of a physical event and an online event are transferable, this is one area that must have a few different considerations. An in-person event will often require the audience to take time off work, or at least their day-to-day schedule if it's an internal organizational event. This often requires much more forward planning, including travel, accommodation arrangements. For this reason, it's often important to open event ticketing up to a year or more in advance for an in-person event. Added to this is the fact that an in-person event often has limited capacity at every level of the event, which could add the motivation to buy early. Now, an online event does not invade as much of the day-to-day schedule of an audience, a fact that must be considered when creating the event schedule if it's entirely online. And therefore, opening up the registration closer to the event and building a clear communication plan from the start of the registration to the end of the event and beyond is something that should be considered. For hybrid events, you may even consider opening up the online portion of the registration later than the in-person portion. While you can still utilize early bird pricing in online events have no real space limitations for the size of an audience. While you can utilize early bird pricing in online events really have no space limitations for the size of the audience. This doesn't mean that an event should have an unlimited registration. Unique limited experiences based on human limitations of breakout watch parties or VIP one-on-one consultations may create that exclusivity that is often a big selling point for an in-person event. So that's pretty much all there is for this section. So let's go through our checklist. In this session, we're going to go through all the considerations that you need to think about in relationship to producing your online event. When you design a large in-person event, much thought is often given not